But they say it wasn't a nuclear disaster, it was an industrial disaster. There's a very important distinction between nuclear disasters and industrial disasters at nuclear reactors. That's a very important bureaucratic French distinction, I think. It's, I have to really cogitate on. I like that. You used the word cogitate several times. I haven't used that word in years. That's a good one. Better than ruminate, because then you don't have to chew on anything, right?
I can think of another one, my wife.
What's that? Something disgusting. So there's a lot of firsts in the history of the world that don't really get a whole lot of consideration. Like for example, for those who have been to Holland, you know that, I mean, Holland doesn't necessarily have more hippies than the rest of Europe, but they have a lot more marijuana. And even though the Dutch themselves actually smoke less of it than the rest of Europe does, but it's more easily available, which I like very much about Holland, incidentally. And I'm out of weed too, and I trade it for CDs, but that's besides the point. It's caught on film, that's good. Put that on YouTube. So, Holland, in 1959 there was a guy named Herman, and Armand is his stage name, and Armand. But Herman, and he was a truck driver driving between Amsterdam and Antwerp, and he met some Jamaicans one day who were unloading a boat, and they introduced a certain herbal substance to him, and the rest is history. And he was actually the first hippie in Dutch history. You know, he was the first. And there may be another one that came along a week later or something, but most Dutch people would agree with this, and incidentally, they know who this guy is. You know, he's generally acknowledged as the first hippie of Holland. But it's sort of debatable, you know, whereas other things like the first windmill in Denmark and in the world that was really big, that was built in the mid-70s in Denmark, and that's more easily verifiable because it was very large. Hard to hide a windmill. It was in the 1970s. The fuel crisis had begun. The choices were presented to us as if we had none. Leaders of industry said they could solve the problem by mastering the power of the radioactive atom. Some folks in western Jutland got a notion in their heads. They thought there might be something they could offer up instead. A few hundred people gathered in a little place called Tvind and declared their will to harness the power of the wind. We're gonna build the biggest windmill in the world. We're gonna build the biggest windmill in the world. There were many who said their science wasn't sound, that such a mighty windmill would simply topple to the ground. Some of them were scientists, the vast majority were not, but they knew with years of effort you could do a lot. Word about the project spread far and wide. 100,000 visitors came to help and to advise. Until one day these windmill builders drove in with a crane and lifted up their giant wings with a mighty chain. We're gonna build the biggest windmill in the world. We're gonna build the biggest windmill in the world. When Tvindcraft was completed, it reached up to the sky. Its wings churned in the air at 54 meters high. The critics all fell silent. No one now was jeering, as even industry agreed this was some damn fine engineering. The wind regaled Jutland from the North Atlantic Sea as it was seamlessly converted into electricity. It was power for the people, leukemia for none, when they declared in Denmark, just south of the midnight sun. We're gonna build the biggest windmill in the world. We're gonna build the biggest windmill in the world. They gave away the patents. They said knowledge should be free. And their plans were copied by a newborn industry. Soon Denmark became known as the windmill building nation. And it all started with some hippies at the Tvindkraft power station. Debates were held in Parliament about which way things should go. Build a nuclear reactor, the majority said no. It could have gone quite differently. In much of the world it did, except for those in Ulfborg who said we're getting off the grid. We're gonna build the biggest windmill in the world. We're gonna build the biggest windmill in the world. We're gonna build the biggest windmill